Welcome to Modern Sage. I'm Leah Guy, and we're with Dr. Maya Shetreat-Klein. You have a fantastic new book. It's getting rave reviews all across the country. It's called The Dirt Cure.
I started out as a traditionally trained pediatric neurologist and a mother, and I was going into private practice, and I realized that there were so many children who were coming to me on multiple medications with lots of chronic illnesses, and what was being offered to them was only pharmaceuticals, including for things like ADHD, where I felt like for 4 and 5-year-olds, I wasn't so comfortable making a medication my first solution to that problem. So I did a lot of delving into the scientific literature, which is what I was taught to do. And I found that food and nutrition was a big part of how we could help heal children's bodies and brains. And that was sort of the beginning of it.
Well, you also wrote in the book that your son had an issue, a pretty severe issue at a young age. Tell us a little bit what happened to him.
Yeah, so at about a year of age, he started to get weird rashes. He started to have asthma symptoms all the time, and he actually had a developmental plateau. So although he had started speaking at about 8 months, saying his first words, he really stopped gaining new words. And he seemed like he was in a lot of distress. He would fall and trip, and he wouldn't catch himself with his hands. He would just like hit his face onto the floor.
Wow.
As a pediatric neurologist, I was obviously
Concerned.
very distressed.
Yes.
And what was interesting was that none of the doctors that I knew were all that concerned or interested and really didn't have that much to offer. So yes, they treated his asthma. They said, well, he's a reactive kid. And I knew intuitively that there was something else going on and they weren't getting to the root cause of the problem.
Right.
Plus the medications were actually, I felt, making him sicker. We realized that actually what was instigating his problem was actually a soy allergy. And once we removed soy, his breathing problems went away within 3 days. So what I realized was even more so the potential food has to heal. It wasn't just eat a nice diet, try to eat healthy, try to buy organic, but really what the science was behind it and how powerful
actually treating conditions with food.
Yeah, exactly.
So in your book, you mentioned the rise of conditions in children, ADHD, allergies, autoimmune issues, all kinds of things that are not only in children, but adults as well.
Everyone.
And it's just going up and up and up and up, no matter how sophisticated we get in our science and healthcare system.
Right.
So what do you think that that's attributed to?
Well, I think we've sort of gotten to rely on technology. We have this idea that that's going to save us, and one of the ways that's kind of played out is with sanitizing. So we sanitize our bodies.
Everything.
We're using hand sanitizers. We're giving antibiotics. We're giving steroids for lots of things. We're not letting kids be outside, right? We're using bleach. We're using all kinds of cleaners, and what it turns out from the scientific literature is that being exposed to diverse microbes is actually what makes our guts, our immune systems, and our brains healthy. And particularly in children, because they're developing, and they have developing immune systems and developing brains, and they need exposure to things.
So let's talk a little bit in the book. You talk about some of the top allergens: corn, soy, wheat.
Well, I will say first about wheat that it's interesting. We know now the way we grow wheat is different, and this was part of the Dirt Cure, was like really looking at where our food comes from, and that's one of the overarching things to kind of learn about how to avoid having these kinds of problems is by knowing where your food comes from, because the way we grow wheat now is very different. And one of the big things that we've discovered is that actually a lot of conventionally grown wheat is sprayed with Roundup right before the wheat is harvested, because the plant dies, it releases its seed, and the harvest yield is greater. So some people wonder, could it be that all this gluten sensitivity or even celiac to some degree is related to that? So there's a lot to learn and a lot of detail that helps us to understand like what to eat, where to source our food, and how to avoid those problems to begin with. Once you have those problems, the first thing is you do have to avoid something that's bothering your body, because you can't heal when you constantly have an irritant in your body.
But if the food goes back to being processed and grown correctly with good soil and without pesticides and without overcropping, or I'm sure there's a better word for that, but with
monocropping, we say, right? Like
monocropping,
growing one thing for like hundreds and hundreds of acres.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you can get a hold of some really good food, is it true that a person may not have a sensitivity to that food as much, or is it
It depends. I mean, I think it has to do with how it's grown, yes. You know, you want to not have irritants or toxins in it like pesticides. And the way we prepare food is different. Like a lot of people, you might have heard, you know, people who eat paleo or who are on the specific carbohydrate diet, things like that, where they avoid grains altogether.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be because grains were traditionally soaked, sprouted, or, you know, fermented like sourdough. Like sourdough used to be the way people ate bread.
Right.
And there are some studies on gluten sensitivity and even celiac, where if you sourdough and then you make another process of sourdough before you bake the bread, that even people with celiac, I mean, don't try this at home, but,
no, I'm gonna try
but
it.
in these studies, you know, it showed that this double sourdough process broke down so much of the gliadin, which is the protein that can be problematic, that actually some people with celiac could even tolerate it.
Oh, wow.
So I think also the other thing is we're eating the kind of flour, you were talking about processed flour.
Right.
It's not just pretty much like nutrient depleted. It actually has a lot of like brominated chemicals added to it. It's actually toxic, you know, in certain ways. And so I wonder, you know, if we started out people on freshly ground flour,
Right.
you know, if there are flour mills,
Then
they're
their
actually
bodies
not that
wouldn't-
expensive.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I know it sounds very, you know,
Well-
time intensive, or even buying fresh flour, because if the demand is there, people will sell it. And then making bread with that, it's a totally different food.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
I do think also that it's possible to heal from allergies, though, and I want to mention that using things like bone broths is one great way. Medicinal mushrooms, aloe, like the gel from the inside of the
Right.
aloe, are all things which are very gut healing. Licorice, not the candy, but a licorice tea or something called
licorice
DGL, which can be very healing for the gastrointestinal tract in moderate amounts. So there are a lot of different ways to kind of heal the gut. And then probiotics is another thing.
To restore.
Fermented foods to help the microbiome to get healthier, and eating fresh food, including, you know, stuff that is sourced from the farm, that's not been power washed, that's not been coated in wax, that's not been washed with chlorine,
Right.
you know, but that still has little bits of traces of dirt on it. You know, it doesn't need to be coated in mud, but you want to be getting that exposure to soil. Soil actually in 1 teaspoon has as many organisms as there are people on the planet.
Oh, wow.
So it's the ultimate probiotic. You know, we can't possibly
So go make
approximate.
a mud pie. That's what we need to do.
Exactly. But I'm not saying people have to go eat big mouthfuls of dirt. I think it's possible to benefit just from having traces of dirt and being outdoors. There's actually a huge amount of interesting literature on some of the microbes in soil and what they do for us. So
That's great. I'm glad you're giving this information. So many people have been misled and misinformed, truly. And this book is a wonderful guide. It also has great recipes in it. Did you make the recipes?
those are all my recipes.
Really?
Yes, and my kids were the ones who chose the recipes that they thought should be included in the book because they were their favorite recipes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I love the book. I love the cover too. Did you
Thank
have? Did you design or?
Well, I did not design it, but I was responsible for the dirt font.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's very cool. Very cool cover. And congratulations on all the good press.
Thank you so much.
Yes, everyone pick up a copy. We have them here at Modern Sage, and you can find them online or at your local bookstore. We'll see you next time.